Becky Kekula is here to advocate for inclusion everywhere. She is working towards an inclusive world where all humans can thrive. As a motivational speaker, she strives to teach acceptance while educating and motivating all people to establish goals and work hard to accomplish them. She's ready to come share her story here at Comfort Kills. Welcome, Becky. Why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, thank you for having me. So, for those of you who are not aware, haven't met me before, my name is Becky Kekula. I am a person with dwarfism, meaning that as an adult, I stand 4 feet tall. And more recently, I've dedicated my life to be more intentional about how society includes people like me based
Okay.
on past life experiences, wanting to advocate for a better future for people like me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I'm so excited to have you on today, and definitely can't wait to see and hear what it is that you're doing out there to bring inclusion to the world everywhere. So, tell me a little bit about what your why is.
My why goes back to when I was born. My parents worked really hard to advocate on my behalf until I had a voice to advocate on behalf of myself. And what I mean by that is that the outside world reminds me every single day that I'm different. And I was fortunate to grow up in a household where my parents helped me find value in the fact that the outside world told me that I was different. And I don't think that everyone else has that luxury of growing up in a household where you have the undivided love and support. And even though there was uncertainty throughout my lifetime, I feel that I was born and raised into a wonderful scenario where if my
Mhm.
parents didn't know the answers, they would try to find them, and
Good.
also come to terms with the fact that you may not know how to do everything or all the
Right.
answers.
Yeah.
And now I view it being really important because 80% of people with dwarfism are born to average height into average height families.
Hmm.
And that means that every time someone is born with dwarfism in a hospital, there's a chance where an average height family is not going to accept them. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that there are so few of us in the world.
Hmm.
And if they hadn't seen a negative portrayal of someone with dwarfism in the media, which is sometimes people's first perception of us,
Hmm.
they may be fearful. And if they see a positive portrayal and more authentic people living
Right.
the best versions of themselves without letting society try to tell them to change,
Uh-huh.
then they may feel more positive and confident about their child's upbringing. So
Okay.
we've kind of come to a point where there are people who are in families where the families are trying to find solutions, trying to find cures. And
Mm.
a lot of us who have a lot of pride for being who we are do not want to see that be the
Hmm.
future for our community.
Okay. Okay. So, speaking of the community and the portrayal out there and the different types of representation, some have more of a platform than others. Can you? We won't talk about the negative, but let's talk about some of the positive influences out there for people with dwarfism.
I think Peter Dinklage is an amazing example because
I love
he began
him.
his career as an actor, and
Uh-huh.
people view him as a talented actor. And
Yes.
dwarfism is just a part of who he is. So I would
Hmm.
say for those people who are viewed for their skill sets, of
Yes.
course, the dwarfism part of them will never go away, but they're known for what they contribute to society rather than
Hmm.
what they don't contribute to society. And so I think
Exactly.
people like Peter, there have been some educational shows out there. There have been some that have brought us backwards, but
Hmm.
I would say just any chance where someone can tell their authentic story to get
Hmm.
the outside world to realize that we're really no different and we want
Right.
to have the same chances and opportunities and participate in life in the same meaningful way.
Hmm. Absolutely. 100%. I think, my personal trade outside of doing stuff like this and doing comfort kills is I'm a nurse. I'm a registered nurse and I'm a pediatric nurse. And to be more specific, I'm a neonatal intensive care nurse.
Wow.
So many times we have patients who come through with dwarfism and then with other complications that they do have. But not all patients who come through and are born with dwarfism have different types of complications. So it's always amazing to see, though. I feel like sometimes all of our patients who come with different types of congenital diagnosis, whether it's heart conditions or whether it's spinal conditions, whatever it may be, they all have, in my experience, have been born to really fantastic parents. And I just feel like, it goes back to kind of God gives you what you can handle. And
Hmm.
it's really amazing to hear that you had a great childhood coming up and upbringing. And that's, where you are today, and it's being able to carry that on to know that there are differences and there are not necessarily differences with you, but it can be possible that families are raising children who are average height families raising dwarfism kids. So,
And thank
um,
you for sharing that part of your story too. It's funny, I was at a conference recently, a disability conference, and someone made a good observation that once someone opens up about their relationship, obviously not saying, "Oh, I know everything," but like,
mhm,
"Oh, I've been in environments, I've seen
right.
people like you before," it kind of breaks down a little bit of a wall where you're like,
Yeah,
"Oh, they understand a little bit more." And
exactly.
and of course, you're seeing it from the beginning
Mhm,
stages of whether families are gonna show their support.
absolutely. All right. So, what are some of the challenges that you actually have faced growing up with being with dwarfism?
A part of dwarfism, uh, and as you were mentioning
Mhm,
earlier, there are some people who have medical complications from day one, and others
right.
who may have medical complications that come up later. I have adult friends with dwarfism who haven't had a surgery in their life. It
Wonderful.
really varies,
Yeah.
but I did have 8 surgeries growing up.
Okay.
So, starting with the day I was born, they didn't think I was going to make it through the night. I had breathing trouble.
Okay.
Fortunately, I got released from the hospital a few days later and was
Good.
okay. Obviously, still alive and kicking now.
Yeah.
But once we did find a specialist after I was about 6 months old, he started tracking how I was growing and how everything was going. And they decided to give me a back brace in my early childhood. Then I ended up having bone taken out of both of my legs when I was 3 years old because I
Hmm.
was bow legged. So they wanted to figure out how to straighten my legs so it wouldn't
Okay.
ruin the alignment in the rest of my body.
Right.
And then I had tubes in and out of my ears because I have narrow ear canals. And
Mhm,
then I had leg surgery again when I was 13.
mhm,
And then right before my sophomore year in high school, I lost my ability to walk, and it was due to spinal cord compression.
mhm.
And while I was getting ready for the school year, I was starting to learn that I wasn't really going to be there for much of the school year, at least at the
Oh,
beginning, because I needed to have a major back surgery to
right.
do or take away the pressure in my spine.
Mhm.
And I was devastated to miss 29 days of school. I
Oh,
found a way to stay with my class, stay on track, but the
good.
fact that I had that surgery and it set me back, I
Mhm,
just was always trying so hard to keep up with the rest of my class.
mhm,
And that was harder on me than actually going under the knife and
mhm,
having the
mhm.
surgery. But I had enough support after I got back and was able to recover. And a few years later, was kind of able to get back on track. Still stayed in the same grades with my friends, and then transitioned into college. And I
Mhm.
haven't had a surgery since, but there are things to look out for.
Right.
Things may come up with spinal stenosis
Yeah.
again. Your back has that pressure, and it's just constantly
Mhm,
trying to manage weight. I had a specialist that I went to growing up, and then I had a general pediatrician who we would
mhm.
go to regularly. And the pediatrician was measuring me based on people my age, and then
Oh,
the doctor in Baltimore, who was a specialist, was measuring me against people with dwarfism. So
right.
I was getting the mixed messaging of like, eat more cheese. You need to watch your eating.
Yeah.
Be careful with portions. And it kind of caused me to just avoid desserts in general,
Mhm.
but I'm still terrible at portions.
Yeah. Oh. Well, we all are. We're all struggling with that. So whether you have dwarfism or any other
Yeah.
disabilities or not, It's a problem. It's a real
Yeah.
problem. And especially with the pandemic right now and being home and just really getting bored and not having things to do,
Mhm.
it's a bigger problem.
Yes.
So let's go back. Let's backtrack a little bit. And I think originally when I heard your story, it was, you out of college, you had applied to thousands of different places and had a few hundred or 100 or so in-person interviews, but you felt like you were not given the same opportunities as others. And so this is where you are now, is it's led you on this different path. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the path that you're on and just more details about that?
Absolutely. So when I got out of college, I had several internship experiences, but apparently that wasn't enough to get me in the door for full-time jobs. I ended up sending out 1,000 resumes. I went on 100 interviews. Every time I walked in the room, I was judged based on my appearance. Finally, was able to get a job after about 6 months through a temporary placement agency.
Mhm.
And then after 7 months of proving myself, I became a permanent employee at my first permanent job.
Right.
So that was like a year span after college
Wow.
before I was able to secure permanent employment.
Right.
And a lot of that was just not feeling confident enough. I was just so eager to get a job. I didn't feel confident enough to ask people, like, what did I do wrong? Or
Mhm.
can you tell me why you're uncomfortable in my presence? I just was trying to be there all polished, do my very best,
Mhm.
but I could feel the negative energy in the room when people were shaking when I would come into the
Oh
interviews.
man.
And it just prevented me from being successful during that process. And then once I got into the job market, I started to realize that we're often celebrating people with disability, more people with disabilities getting hired into jobs,
Mhm.
but they're staying at low levels. Like they're not given the opportunity, they're not
Hmm.
given mentorship to be able to move up the ladder.
Right.
Unless there may be people with disabilities, maybe it's people with invisible disabilities. And if no one knows about their disabilities, they may be more prone to getting a promotion.
Mhm. Hmm.
But then I was in the same job, switched around different bosses, same type of position for 5 years, and then I had another assistant job for another year. And there were people at the second job who were
Mhm.
pitching me to other job opportunities because it just wasn't working out in that one position. And they kept pitching me specifically as like a lifetime administrative assistant.
Okay.
And I was frustrated because that wasn't what I wanted my career path to be. I had put my time in,
Uh-huh.
and I would show up at interviews that they pitched me for, and it would be like, you don't seem like you want to be a lifetime assistant.
Right.
And I would send off that energy that I was driven and made for more.
Mhm.
And then I decided to build my own path, and I left that other job and moved to my home with my parents
Mhm.
after living independently for so long, and got the support to build a speaking business,
Mhm.
go out, share my story, get people to listen to all of the obstacles that I had faced up until that point in time. In my head, I thought that I had to reach a certain level of success in order to tell my story, but
Uh-huh.
people actually wanted to hear it.
Right. Yeah.
And then I was constantly seeking, I'm always honest with people about doing speaking as much as I love it and continue to do it.
Mhm.
It hasn't really been something that I could live off of as my sole and only career.
Right.
And it gets lonely if you're constantly just on your own doing that and
Exactly.
having that be the only thing you're doing. So from that point forward, I wanted jobs that were going to complement the work that I did speaking and also have the support for
Mhm.
when speaking opportunities come up.
Right.
I worked at the Actors Union for a few years
Okay.
in the diversity department. And then I currently work in an organization where we work with corporate America to help them with disability inclusion,
Okay.
starting with those beginning stages of making it known that you're willing to make an accommodation for someone from the early stages of the application process, the interview process, and when they're onboarded,
Mhm.
offer that mentorship and support.
Yeah.
And once that level of trust is built, hopefully more organizations can come forward and feel proud to include people like me in their workplace
Mhm.
and not have awkward experiences. And a lot of times it may be due to lack of etiquette and
Mhm.
understanding before the interviews happen so that candidate doesn't have to feel
Right.
the way I did.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's really just giving back so people don't
That's
have to
awesome.
face what I did. And I know
Yeah.
lots of people face that, even what you were saying in these times with managing weight, but also managing jobs. I know a
Uh-huh.
lot of people are out of work right now, and I'm very fortunate and blessed to have work continue to come in.
Mhm.
But I think it's just trying to parse it out and see, like,
Right.
is it really they're not meant for the job, or is it that
Exactly.
you're afraid that they're not going to be able to do the
Right.
job, which is an assumption.
Yeah, yeah. So that's the getting into the position and nailing that position that you desire and aspire to have. But let's go into when we did our meet and greet. You had discussed the inclusion aspect of once you're in the company, and employee with a disability shouldn't have to ask for different types of accommodations. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Exactly. So it's important for a manager to feel confident about their hiring
Hmm.
decisions. So hopefully you'll understand that a person with a disability coming into your workforce is actually a really big asset, because people are facing so many challenges in everyday life and they find ways to adapt unlike others.
Hmm.
And if they give people the chance to adapt in their workplace, they'll be surprised at the loyalty, the amount that people stay
Hmm.
longer, and dedication. I always said, even in my early on jobs, I'm trying 20 times harder than the person next to me. There's no explanation for it,
Hmm.
but it's just kind of what's expected of me.
Right.
And you're constantly trying to fight that assumption, and people assuming that you're not capable.
Hmm.
So I think what's important in the workplace is, even beyond your direct manager, having a place where they're willing to open up and say, I'm here if you need help.
Hmm.
I'm not going to do this
Yeah.
for you because I know you want to do it on your
Right.
own, but just let me know if you need my support.
Hmm.
Rather than putting people to the side and just having them work in their corner and
Hmm.
not being with the rest of the workplace, allow them to feel empowered to be part of a team and add
Yeah.
value with their contributions and
Yeah.
perspectives. And just make it known that you're willing to make an accommodation if they need
Right.
it. And in most cases, people don't take you up on it
Mhm.
because they can figure it out.
Exactly. Yeah. But still be there to support and let them know that they
Right,
have something to fall back on if they need to. That's awesome.
exactly.
That's important. I think that's really important. And so I think it's really great what you're saying. But a lot of times I think people forget too that it's not just disabilities, it's diversity as well, right? So a lot of times the same mindset, I guess, also applies to different racial ethnicities, different types of just educational background. They may think that somebody with a master's or a doctorate can perform at a much higher level than somebody who came in with just a bachelor's or an associate's degree. But there's so many different ways that type of stereotype is just being thrown onto different types of groups. So it's a shame. But being able to just as an employer and as a leader say to your people, I am here to support you. Just let me know how and when you need any support, and be there for them. And I think that's a really important message that a lot of leaders will benefit from. So thank you for that.
And I think what you said earlier about how we're all kind of we're dealt cards that we can
Uh-huh.
handle. I often catch people because they'll say to me, "Oh, I had this experience, but it wasn't as bad as what you've gone through." And I'm like, "Wait a minute. If we're dealt with the cards that we can
Yeah.
handle, then
Yeah.
an experience and a challenge is a
Right.
challenge. Just because you may not be facing the same amount of adversity as I
Exactly.
am, like, it's a
Yeah.
challenge, and don't forget that. Like, don't underweigh
Hmm.
that." And as you said, across diversity, I think just historically, there's a lot of intersectionality. Disability hits all the different demographic categories. But I think historically, has been progress in other areas of
Hmm.
diversity, and disability is still a long way
Right.
behind. And that's why sometimes people with disabilities may be prone to identify with their other
Hmm.
identity if they fit into some of the other categories, based on whether or not they've made more progress
Hmm.
historically.
Hmm. My last guest that I just interviewed was somebody from the LGBTQIA community, and
Hmm.
one of the things that she said was just a lot of people want to make the assumption that things keep adding on to the acronym, but really they've always been there all along. It's just now they're finally getting traction and they're finally making themselves known, and for people to be aware that there's more
Yeah.
than just your very basic level. Um, knowledge that you have of the community. There is so much more to it. There's such huge variations. And I think that's a lot of times that we like to be in our own bubble and just focus on what we know and we're comfortable with. And some topics that are uncomfortable, we don't want to face it head on. And so this is one of them. You know, people with the American Disability Act, those types of things. There's so much to learn and understand about it, but a lot of people and employers would rather not, you know, have to quote unquote deal with the situation, which is really unfortunate. There's a lot of ignorance there still, and so lots and lots of ways for them to learn and grow. So, with that said, is there some common topics that, with you working with different types of organization, that is looking to really improve their diversity and inclusivity? I'm not sure if that's a word, but inclusiveness.
Yeah.
Are there lots of common things and themes that you're starting to see organizations are having concerns and questions about?
I think disability etiquette is a huge thing. Like, where do we even
Mm,
start? I was at an event where it was an LGBTQIA workplace initiatives event, and there was someone who I met from a company who said, I'm all in with the LGBTQIA
mm,
inclusion, but when it comes to disability inclusion, I don't know where to
mm,
start. And I get frustrated when people say that because it's like, just get started. And as we've
right.
talked about, there are a lot of similarities among the
Yeah.
groups. And if you know how to get started with the other groups, why should this
Mhm.
prevent you? But it usually is they're worried about ju- falling on their
Mhm.
words and not using the right etiquette and tools. And I think that continues to come up. I serve on the board of the National Center for Disability Journalism at Arizona State
Okay.
University, and they came out with a great style guide that is really like the AP version and the description that people prefer across
Okay.
disability. And I think it's important just to become
Mhm.
knowledgeable about the terminology, but don't get
Right.
stuck on it. Educate yourselves, but at the same time, do the
Mhm.
hiring and be inclusive, because those may be the people that you can learn from and get better if you just start including right
Right, right.
away. And then I specifically manage an index. It's called the Disability Equality Index that companies take to measure their disability
Oh,
inclusion
nice.
efforts. And it allows them to start thinking about, okay, what do we need to do to get
Right.
started? Include disability in your diversity
Uh-huh.
statement. Make it known that you're willing to make accommodations if people
Yeah.
ask for them. Engage in the disability community. Consider cross disability focus
Mhm.
groups. So, if you have a product line you're trying to release to include the disability
Mhm.
community, see what people's
Mhm.
thoughts are. And a lot of times, companies' employee resource groups can be great resources
Right.
for that.
Yeah.
And then, just even there are people who may want to start their own business, people with disabilities. If they have a for profit
Mhm.
business that's 51% owned and operated by people with
Mhm.
disabilities, they can become certified and they can do business with these big corporations who are willing to
Yeah.
work with them. And I think it's really important to think about entrepreneurship as well, because even in those moments when I was going through all those
Mhm.
interviews, I could have thought a little bit more about what would that look like, because people can't tell me no in that
Right. Yeah.
scenario.
That's awesome. That's really awesome. So that's a lot, like a front load of information, but definitely great for organizations to hear and really ask themselves, right? Reach out to you and,
Right.
and take that index to see where they're really at. Sometimes they may feel like they're very inclusive, but it doesn't come off
Right.
that way for those who are actually part of that category, and they feel like they're not being given everything and all the resources that they need, or the support, really, for that matter. So what are the
Yeah.
common topics that you think organizations need to hear more about? Sometimes they'll reach out to you and ask, like you were saying earlier, for example, just get started. So, what are some of the things that you just kind of wish that they were well aware of to kind of get them on the right track?
I think a lot of people, when they think about diversity and inclusion, they have a blanket statement that's like, when we mean diversity and inclusion, we mean
Hmm.
everyone. But unless you specifically state out
Yeah.
all the groups, we're going to continue to
Oh
feel left
yeah.
behind. And I think it's okay, you want to be forward thinking, but make sure you practice
Right.
what you preach. So if you're going to put this on your website or you're going to say, yes, you do it, you want to feel super confident about
Hmm.
that yes, rather than just
Right.
checking a box.
Right. Because I think a lot of times people hear the word diversity and they think it's related to race or ethnicity or background, but they're not thinking beyond that, which so
Right.
for sure.
And sometimes it's people who may even have a disability themselves. 75% of disabilities are invisible. So I think very few people are as familiar with the Americans with Disabilities Act and how it defines disability. But there are a lot more protections that if people look and become educated. And it's also just strengthening the word disability. People are always trying to run away from it. They are thinking of the worst case scenario, someone who is about to pass away, without thinking of the full range and rainbow of people. But even that person has value to add to the world.
Exactly. And my husband worked with wounded warriors for an extended period of time. He was a soldier himself, has retired from the military. But when he worked with wounded warriors, every meet and greet that we ever had, it was with a wounded warrior and their significant other. And oftentimes I'll get the significant other coming up to me and going, "What's wrong with your husband?" Like, not that what's wrong with him, but they're looking for where the injury is, the visible injury. And mind you, he's not a wounded warrior, but he has been through war multiple times and he's done multiple things. And there's so many wounded warriors that are so impacted by traumatic brain injury from PTSD that those things are, and it's still such a taboo statement and diagnoses in the military community that it's really sad. And I really think we need to start normalizing it more and letting people understand that it's not so scary and it's not bad to associate with that, and that there are, that you should own it, because I think a lot of times if you take that step to really start saying that this is what you have, then maybe you'll be able to grow and then help this community in general advance from there.
And that comes up a lot in employee resource groups. There are a lot of people who are more likely to become members of the veterans resource group than the disability resource group, even if they are technically identify as both. It's very common for people to feel more pride when it comes to that veteran label versus
very
disability.
True, 100%. I see it from my perspective as a military spouse to a retired veteran. Definitely see that's a true thing for sure. So what advice do you have for someone who's currently working for an employer who is not practicing diversity and being inclusive?
I would say so many people get caught up on mistakes that they've made in the past. It prevents them from moving forward and getting better. So I would try to say, leave the past behind and show up tomorrow and be your very best, and figure out how you can be more inclusive of those around you, and encourage innovation and inclusivity if you have the hiring power, or if you can influence the decisions of the hiring power people. Stay informed and help others get informed. And if you see someone who's struggling or maybe on their own, I know right now we're in a lot of the virtual spaces, but if even it goes back to the school age children, if you see someone sitting alone at the lunchroom, go up to them, have a conversation. They could be your next best friend.
Exactly. That's important. That's important. So what are the types of resources out there that you would suggest? And we're talking resources for both the individuals with disability and also like from an organizational perspective. Where can they start going now to learn more?
Absolutely. So Disability In is the organization that I work for. So disabilityin.org has a whole public facing resources page. We put together best practices, etiquette, and then that National Center for Disability Journalism style guide, anything that can help you become educated and more informed. I would get to know the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA.gov, really figure out like what it's all about. And then there's another resource called the Job Accommodation Network. And you can even type in disability and the potential accommodations someone may request with that disability. And it's also good for the employee and employer side of things.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. That's great. So, Becky, what do you do on your free time? What's your hobby?
During these times, I grew up sailing and I miss it a lot. I won't say that I've done it recently, but I just love being on the water. And then I love taking photos. I was really excited to finally go from an iPhone
Uh-huh.
6 to the 11 in the past year, just so I could take more high
Yeah.
quality photos. Yeah, I just love taking walks, looking
Mhm.
at scenery, love good views. I used to travel a lot, but
Yeah.
right now haven't in a bit. But
Where was your
just look,
favorite place to travel to?
well, right before COVID hit, my husband and I went on our honeymoon
Okay.
in Hawaii, and I had been there a few
Mhm.
times in Maui, but
Yeah.
it's so peaceful and so beautiful. And then I did take a sailing trip in the British
Okay.
Virgin Islands while I was in college,
That's
and that was
fun.
pretty nice. And now I just feel like there's so many more places to see, and I hope
I
this all ends so
Me
I can
too,
go.
me too. Where would be your next place to go? As soon as COVID's over, where's the first place you wanna travel to when you're able to?
I really want to go to the Maldives,
Okay. Very nice.
and Australia's always been on my list.
Mhm.
I wanted to study abroad there in school, but my grades didn't quite make it to allow me to do that.
Oh. That's awesome. Those are great places. Those are both on my list as well. We had a trip to Italy that was planned, that was paid for in like late 2019 for us to go during the summer of 2020. And then when everything happened in March, we kind of were like, no, I think it'll be over by then. You know, we all kind of went for we're going to flatten the curve and we're going to get through this and it's going to be great. And then we're waiting it out. And then come May, we're like, all right, let's just request the refund. It's time to just refund the money.
No,
So my daughter
hopefully,
and I ended up doing a puzzle of Venice instead, just to kind of commemorate the loss of going to Italy. So I can't wait for things to open back up. And, you know, I'm not sure how things are going to change, but it will eventually. Um,
yeah.
if you could put a message on a billboard, any message at all, just to put on display for a little while, what would it be?
Don't let others limit your beliefs in yourself.
Okay. I love it. That's beautiful, and that's so important. I think, you know, sometimes we let others tell us enough that we start believing in it, right? And it becomes our mindset as well. No, I'm not good enough. I can't do that. It's not for me. You know, such and such can do it way better. And I think that's a really important message. So thank you. That's really good. And sometimes we don't know what we don't know. So if what questions have I not asked? Would you like for me to ask, or would you like to speak about?
Well, I love just uh, putting it out there as many times as
Mhm.
possible. Really ask questions and don't make assumptions.
Right.
You're going to learn so much more if you take that
Mhm.
approach. And I would say that we're all going through something, regardless of whether or
Right.
not you identify as having a
Right.
disability. So try starting conversations with how are you today rather than going right into an
Uh-huh.
interview or asking someone to do a task.
Mhm.
Really try to get to that ground level, reduce any potential of elephants hanging out in the
Oh
room.
yeah.
And then at the end of the day, I would say people with disabilities want a chance to participate
Mhm.
in a meaningful way in
Yeah.
society, but don't let people get away with mistakes that they make because that's not going to help
Uh-huh.
either. And everyone is prone to making
Right.
mistakes. We're all human. And I would say just find ways to offer constructive feedback whenever
Mhm.
possible
Mhm.
so it can help that person when the next opportunity comes about,
Right.
even if your opportunity isn't the one for them.
Right. Wow. Powerful. Thank you. So, Becky, I know that you perform speaking engagements and there's many ways for people to get a hold of you, but what is your preferred way if our listeners would like to get a hold of you and reach out to you to ask questions, to book a speaking engagement, an organization that would like to learn more and bring you on board so that they can really ramp up their area of this, where can they reach out to you?
Absolutely.
Okay.
beckymotivates.com, or you can email me directly at beckymotivates at
Hmm.
gmail.com. You can see my videos of past speeches. I've done a few virtual speeches more
Awesome.
recently at youtube.com/beckymotivates. Becky
Okay.
Motivates. I'm happy to support anyone who wants to come on the journey.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Any last words?
Just stay positive, keep an open mind, and you'll learn so much from people like me if you just give them a chance.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Becky, for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank
I
you.
think we've learned a lot today, and I think there's a lot of room for opportunities for others to really dig within themselves and their organization and see how they can improve from this. So much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you.